Questions and comments. Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I listened with interest to the honourable member's response to this bill, although they are supporting this bill. First, I want to tell him quite clearly that this government has provided a very strong leadership, not also to around the world, but also in Canada, Mr. Speaker. And at every given time at the NDP that opposes it. Matter of fact, in his speech, he talked about that Canada should be named and shamed internationally. Mr. Speaker, their record is their leader and themselves go overseas, and they take no shame in condemning Canada, Mr. Speaker. What a pity! What kind of official opposition is there that goes overseas to condemn Canada? And most importantly, Mr. Speaker, when I raised the question that 3 companies had been convicted, I got a very strong laughter from the other side of what they're talking about. Let me remind them, Mr. Speaker, they may think Canadian companies are corrupt. They may think Canadian companies are bad. Let me tell them we have full confidence that Canadian companies are doing very well, and the less convictions we have about bribery speaks very well for Canada, not for them to laugh at these things, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Beaches East York.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I wish the Parliamentary Secretary across the way had listened a little more carefully to my speech, because my point was, in fact, quite the opposite, that this is not the NDP arguing that we should be named and shamed. It is with regret, in fact, that we note that this legislation only comes forward, Mr. Speaker, in response to a public report by a credible international organization that notes our lax legislation on these issues and the need for Canada to bring itself up to speed with what the rest of the world is doing. And in fact, this legislation only brings us, in fact, up to kind of par with the rest of the world, in line with the practices of 36 of 39 other OECD countries. Mr. Speaker, with respect to Canadian corporations overseas, by no means is the NDP condemning Canadian corporate conduct overseas. But, Mr. Speaker, what we know that Canadian corporations require and look forward to is a consistent set of standards and consistent enforcement, so that all corporations around the world can be sure that they're playing on a level playing field. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Winnipeg North.
Mr. Speaker, one of the greatest hindrances around the world in many countries is the issue of corruption. And until they're able to deal with that issue, economic prosperity tends to elude them. And this is most unfortunate. And this is when, in fact, you want to see countries around the world, such as Canada, play a strong leadership role. That's why we have the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. It's a unified grouping of countries that have taken an approach that the best way to try to deal with corruption is for countries like Canada to be more aggressive and play a progressive role in combating corporate corruption, to try to prevent the corruption of public services around the world, in particular in countries where there's a real need, Mr. Speaker. And there are a number of countries that have really been taken advantage of or exploited. I've had students in Winnipeg North that I've met with that have even identified this as an important issue in a high school setting, Mr. Speaker. My question to the member is, to what degree do you feel that the government could in fact be doing so much more, that they've had opportunities such as private members' bills to actually act earlier, but they've chosen not to?
Once again, I presume the member is not asking the chair the question, but in fact would like it redirected to his colleague, the Honourable Member for Beaches East York.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would suggest to the member who asked the question that it's not just prosperity that doesn't get shared in response to corruption around the world, but as I said in my speech, it goes beyond the material needs of people that don't get met. It goes to the democratic aspirations of people and their desire to live and choose the environmental standards that they want to live in. It goes to fundamental issues of health and safety in the workplaces in which they work, and the prospects, in fact, Mr. Speaker, of coming home at night after a long day's work. And I hope that I made it clear that there are higher standards around the world in terms of transparency on these matters that Canada could adhere to, and in fact Canada could in fact aspire to even greater standards if this government were so willing, but they seem in fact quite reluctant, Mr. Speaker, to even do the minimum.